What's up, fellas? In today's video, we're going to be continuing the historic NBA redraft series as now we have moved on to 2006. This is already the fourth different redraft that we have done, and this one is a rough one. There's interesting things as relates to the future history, is that even the right way to phrase that, of the NBA? But this class specifically, when it comes to redrafting it, especially once you get past like 6 or 7, is a very, very rough class. But we're going to go through it. I'm going to re-rank all the players in the order that I think that they should have been drafted, and then we're going to talk about how this new order would have impacted the NBA moving forward. But quickly, before we get started, if you enjoy content like this, then consider subscribing. I upload twice a day, every day, all throughout the NBA season, so it's a great place for consistent NBA content. If you enjoy this type of content, the best way to let me know and the quickest way to let me know is by leaving a like rating on the video. It helps me out a ton. It helps get the video out to more people on YouTube. And then I know to make more videos just like this because I know that you guys are enjoying it. And if you want to check me out at any kind of social media that I have, it's in a link tree down in the description below. With those things said, let's begin at number 1 overall, where the Toronto Raptors are on the clock. Initially, they selected Andrea Bargnani because nobody really knew who to pick in this draft class, and so they just defaulted to Bargnani. That is not going to be the first selection here, and I honestly think that if you want to, you can make a case for any of the 3 guys that I'm going to go 1, 2, and 3 here on, and you could make a case for any of them as the first overall pick, and it would be a very, very strong case. I don't feel all that strongly about the order of any of the top 3 here. At 1, though, I'm going to go with Lamarcus Aldridge as the best player in this class. I think, the overall, career statistics, the longevity of his career kind of necessitated him being right here. You could make a case that, the 2 guys behind him have had higher peaks or, more postseason success or whatever the case may be. But as an individual player, I'm picking Lamarcus Aldridge here. In terms of how this affects Toronto, the following year, the Raptors were actually really good. They won 47 games. Bargnani didn't really do anything for them. And Aldridge would obviously be a really, really helpful and critical piece. The biggest thing that happens for Toronto moving forward, of course, is that Chris Bosh leaves in 2010. I don't think that Lamarcus Aldridge being there really changes that. Maybe it does, but I'm not willing to project that out. So this doesn't really change a ton other than the fact that Lamarcus Aldridge would be in Toronto rather than Portland, which is important because Portland got a haul out of this class. Next up now, speaking of Portland, number 2 overall, they originally selected Lamarcus Aldridge here at 2. There's some weird trade stuff here that I've already accounted for in this draft order. So for example, Chicago originally held the 2nd pick. They moved down to 4. There's another one later on as well where like 6 and 7 get flopped. I think 8 gets moved as well. I went ahead and accounted for those just so we're all on the same page. So I know that initially this was Chicago's pick, but it was traded to Portland, and so I'm going to keep them there. And in this scenario, Portland is going to get Kyle Lowry. I think you could make a case for him to be the first overall pick. I just think the overall career statistics of Aldridge necessitated him being the first overall pick. But this is a really interesting scenario here because it's difficult to project what happens to Portland because so much about their future after this draft was related to the draft itself and the fact that they got Brandon Roy and the fact that they got Lamarcus Aldridge, and they don't get either of those guys in this redraft. So it's like, how do you project what happens to Portland? The one thing that I can say here is that, Aldridge obviously eventually moves on for them in free agency, but if you're getting Lowry here instead of Brandon Roy, Roy obviously is really good initially, but he doesn't stick around long enough to be around for the Damian Lillard years. Assuming that Lowry stays and does not get traded or go somewhere else in free agency, he would be around and healthy and really, really good by the time Dame shows up. Now, do they still select Dame? I have no idea, but I think that's a backcourt that worked. It would have been really interesting, and of course, Lowry still would have been healthy and good to go, rather than Brandon Roy, whose knees completely had kind of failed him at that point. Next up now, 3, Charlotte. This is probably going to be the most controversial one. I can promise you there are going to be people in the comment section saying that this guy should have gone number 1 overall, and I'm not saying you're wrong. I think you could have made an argument all the way around, as I keep saying here in the beginning of this video. But 3rd, I'm going to go Rajon Rondo. This doesn't really have a huge impact on Charlotte because they're really bad over the next couple of years. Obviously, Rondo is way more impactful to them than Adam Morrison ever was, who was the initial pick here. But the bigger impact here is on Boston because continually in these redrafts, we were just picking apart the big 3 era in Boston and the 2008 title. Like the assets and the Ray Allen and the Kevin Garnett trade are both all over the place as a result of these redrafts. And now Rondo isn't in Boston either. And so I think at this point, like if you're just taking, if you're putting this into the context of all these collective redrafts, like Boston, there's no way Boston wins the 2008 title. Like if they don't end up with KG and Ray Allen and they don't end up with Rajon Rondo here in this redraft, there's just no way. And Paul Pierce probably gets moved at some point as well. So what that means is if we're taking Boston out of the equation here, then a couple of things possibly happen here. So Boston doesn't make the 2008 finals. maybe LeBron makes the finals in that 2008 season, and then we get that LeBron-Kobe matchup that we wanted in the finals that year in 2008, and either LeBron wins the title in 2008 and potentially stays in Cleveland in 2010 because he did win the title for the city, or Kobe wins the finals and he ends up with 6 rings rather than 5 because he wins the finals in 2008 there, the ring that Boston initially won. So lots of crazy scenarios to consider there, because just continually, like, the amount of things that had to go right and come together for Boston to create that big 3 is becoming really apparent in this video, and it's just a really, really interesting way to look back on, and one of the reasons I wanted to do kind of a redraft series like this. So Rondo goes 3, Lowry 2, and Aldridge 1. As I said, like, these are the best 3 guys in the class, and if you want to argue about their positioning, that's fine. This is where I have them, but I think there's definitely a conversation to be had at each of those spots. Next up now, 4. As I said, I gave this to Chicago already. Originally, this was Portland's pick. Tyrese Thomas was the selection here at 4, and then obviously these things got flipped. Tyrese Thomas is not going to be the selection here. I'm going to go with Paul Millsap, a guy that you could argue Tyrese Thomas was kind of supposed to be, although Millsap is obviously way, way less athletic. And for Chicago, like, the disaster of the Ben Wallace signing still happens, but they're a really good team next year. Like, they win 49 games. They've got Luol Deng, Kirk Hinrich, Ben Gordon. And Paul Millsap, like, really helps them. Of course, it takes him a few years to get it going, but if you're taking, like, present day Paul Millsap and putting it on, or, like, you know, prime Paul Millsap and putting it on those Bulls teams, they're really, really good. They're like a 50-win team, you know what I mean? Because it's not like Tyrese Thomas was doing anything crazy for them. The other thing to consider here, though, is they got crazy, crazy draft luck to get Derrick Rose in 2008. And if they're not even in the lottery, of course, they don't even end up with Rose. And they weren't great. Like, they didn't have a great record, but they were only a few games, or like 4 games out of the 8th spot in the East. And if Paul Millsap in place of Tyrese Thomas makes up 4 games, then they don't end up with Derrick Rose, would be the biggest consideration here. But you can already tell how rough this class is now moving forward, the fact that Paul Millsap is the 4th pick in this draft. Next up now at 5, Atlanta, I went with Brandon Roy, and I know that you could make the case for him to go number 4. I know you can, and maybe even higher than that if you want to. If you're going strictly based off peak, Brandon Roy was an incredible player, but I personally could not put him ahead of Paul Millsap given the fact that his career was so short. And if we're just going off of how good they were in a moment in time, it's not close. But I had to put Brandon Roy at number 5 here. And this has some interesting domino effects because initially Atlanta went with Sheldon Williams. I am continually embarrassed by some of the picks that Atlanta is making here in these redrafts. It's disgusting that Sheldon Williams went 5, honestly. But that 06-07 Hawks team, the year after this draft, was the last like really bad Hawks team in a while. They had a run of consecutive playoff appearances after this, and of course Sheldon Williams really didn't do anything for them. And so if you put Brandon Roy on those teams where you've got Josh Smith and eventually Al Horford and Joe Johnson, like, those Hawks teams would be really, 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 really good, assuming all those guys could play together at the same time. So a big impact there on Atlanta in a hugely positive way, getting Brandon Roy instead of Sheldon Williams. Next up now, 6, Portland. Again, the pick was originally Brandon Roy. This is kind of similar to the Lowry thing. It's difficult to project how this impacts their roster because so much is related to this draft itself. I'm going to give them JJ Redick right here at the 6th pick. So Redick and Lowry is not a bad haul out of this class at all. And again, Redick should be around by the time Dame shows up as well. So that gives them, assuming everybody stays, Lowry, Redick, and then Damian Lillard, assuming that is the selection that they still make in that upcoming draft a little bit later down the road. Other than that, it's really tough to project things for Portland. We're going to start going a little bit quicker here now because after the 8th pick, these guys are like relatively insignificant when it comes to like the future of the league. So there are not really any changes here. So this number 8 one though is the last big one. So this pick, I gotta remember exactly how this goes down. So this pick was Houston's initially. Houston's really good in the 06-07 season. They win 52 games. T-Mac and Yao Ming are awesome. But this is a kind of an infamous trade because this is the first like big Daryl Morey move because Rudy Gay was seen as this big time high upside player at the time. He goes with the 8th pick here to Houston and they move the pick to go and get Shane Battier. He's like a wing defender and everybody's like, well, I mean, Shane Battier is a good player, but like Rudy Gay has a chance to be this huge superstar. And it ends up being a huge win of a trade for Houston and kind of the first, advanced stats analytics type trade here. So Shane Battier is really good for them. They win 52 games the following year. For Memphis, they end up with PJ Tucker here rather than Rudy Gay. PJ Tucker's a nice wing defender. Obviously, once he gets to his prime, it takes him a little bit to get going, but it doesn't really change much for Memphis because Rudy Gay, still does some things there for them initially. But it's just interesting looking back kind of on what that 8th pick meant for Houston moving forward, kind of establishing Morey's style, as a GM. I'm just going to read the last, 6 or 7? Like, I almost didn't even go to 15 here because This redraft it's just so crazy how weak this class is depth-wise and at the top. 9, Golden State, Andrea Bargnani. 10, Seattle, Thabo Sefolosha. 11, Orlando, Randy Foye. 12, New Orleans, Jordan Farmar. 13, Philly, Shannon Brown. 14, Utah, Steve Novak. 15, New Orleans, Ronnie Brewer. I don't know if I need to even say anything about this. Like, this class as a whole is gross. It really is. Like, I mean, I like Lowry, Aldridge, Rondo. Like, Millsap is cool. Brandon Roy had a really, really nice stretch. But this is, like, we're going to see once we go through some more of these modern classes, but this is arguably the weakest draft class in league history. It might be. I know that there have been some tough ones. You go back to like 2001 and then the 2013 one, but 2013 has some really, really good players later on in the class. This one is just, it's pretty tough top to bottom. So that's going to be the end of the 2006 historic redraft. It sucks that there weren't more things to talk about in terms of how this impacted the league long term, but these players just weren't as good, and there weren't as many trade things impacted here outside of the Boston thing to really take a look at here with this redraft. But that is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker, as I said in the beginning. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, you can check out more videos from me at the boxes on screen here, and you can sub to the channel for twice-a-day videos about the NBA every single day. You can also leave a like rating on the video as well, as I said, and check me out at various socials at the bottom of the screen and a link tree down in the description below. With all those things said, hope you guys have an awesome rest of your day, and I will see you all next time.